getting ready to spray our linear L-411 high build epoxy primer surfacer on a 65 Lincoln Continental. Since we're using this product today, I want to take a little time to go over the TDS, go over proper mixing and application of this product. This is a very slow primer. This is geared more for restoration, not necessarily much for collision. You can use it for collision work, but being that it is such a slow primer, being that it is a true epoxy, this is a 4-to-1 epoxy with an induction period. This is a true epoxy, not a hybrid. It is a high build sandable epoxy. You can use it over bare metal, you can use it over filler work, and that's kind of the whole point with it, is to use the same thing throughout the whole process, as keep things as uniform as possible.
So let's look at the TDS for this. This is a expertly formulated high build epoxy primer surfacer designed for excellent adhesion, chemical resistance, and corrosion protection. Designed with inorganic, organic corrosion inhibitor and anti-corrosive pigment to encapsulate and neutralize rust. So let's talk about what that means. Almost any time that you do strip a car down to bare metal, you will have a little bit of bare metal kind of sitting for, you know, maybe a few hours before you get epoxy on it. What this is meant to do is neutralize any microscopic rust that is formed on those panels, because after 30 minutes exposed to air, steel will start to rust microscopically. You will not see it, but it is there. And this will encapsulate that rust. It will kill that rust so that you don't have problems down the road in the future. This product includes moisture scavenger properties and has also been designed for superior build and sandability. Moisture scavengers means that if I am spraying a panel, maybe it's really humid, hot, humid day, there is some humidity on my panel. And when I go to spray it, maybe if you use different primers, you may actually trap some humidity under your primer. What this product does is chase that humidity off the panel. As soon as you put this on, it actually brings that humidity to the surface and lets it escape before it would become a problem. This is a 4-to-1 mix. Required products: L-411 hardener, that is the catalyst for L-411. This is a 76% solids by weight, which is exactly what our primer shrink test showed when we did wet film build versus dry film build tests. When we look at surface prep, thoroughly sand bare metal with no finer than 80 grit or sandblast. Sandblasted parts do not need to be sanded, but they can be with no finer than 80 grit. The reason we sand bare metal with only 80 grit and nothing finer is bare metal is very hard. You won't get the scratch that you will get if you were sanding, say, filler or primer. If you sand 180 on filler or primer, it's a fairly deep scratch. On metal, you almost begin to polish it at that point. We want a nice tooth for our epoxy to sit and grab, so we're going to use nothing finer than 80 grit. Metal prep systems are okay. We're not using any acid etch primers, nothing before this except maybe a metal prep. That is up to you. The metal prep system that I would recommend is SX579 and SX520 from the PPG line. And either way, whether we metal prepped it or not, we're going to clean it very thoroughly with acetone before we spray it if we're using it over bare metal. As a high build primer surfacer over bodywork or fiberglass, which is what we're doing today, we're using it over bodywork. We're going to finish the substrate with 150 to 240. This car in here is finished to about 180. Then we clean with a high quality wax and grease remover. The wax and grease remover that we use is SX320, and we're going to wipe the whole car a couple times with that, and then we're going to spray it with L-411. It's all masked up, so now we're going to start cleaning it. And there is a lot of back and forth about using wax and grease remover over fillers. Some people will spray it on the rag and then wipe the car. Some people will spray it on the car and then wipe it like I do. A lot of people think that that filler will absorb the wax and grease remover, and being that filler is very porous, it will to some degree, but that wax and grease remover is very fast evaporating. So if that filler were to absorb a little bit of it, by the time you turn the booth on and get some air moving in here, mix your primer, by the time you come in and spray it, that will all be evaporated anyway. And the whole point of wax and grease remover is when I spray it on here, I want to wet that down so that any contamination that's on the surface is lifted to the surface, and then when you wipe it off. If you're putting it on the rag, it's not doing as thorough of a job as it should. The mix ratio, 4 parts 411 to 1 part 421. And if you've noticed, I even give gravimetric formulas here, which means if I'm gonna weigh this on a scale, I want everything to be 100% accurate. This primer and this activator weigh differently per volume. An ounce of this weighs differently than an ounce of this. So that's where the manufacturing chemists have come up with a gravimetric formula. This is what your computer is going to tell you if you go to mix a base coat or things like that. It is all gravimetric formulas for complete accuracy. If you were going to mix, say, 16 fluid ounces of L-411, we're going to go 656 grams of L-411. We're going to zero the scale. We're going to go 110.4 grams of L-421. That will be a perfect volumetric 4-to-1 mixed ratio done gravimetrically on the scale. There is a 20-minute induction period with this product. It is very crucial that you follow this. What this means is, because this is such a slow epoxy, you need to mix this product, mix it in your can, your cup, whatever you're gonna mix it in, stir it thoroughly, let it sit for 20 minutes. You can agitate it every now and then, just stir it up a little bit. Let it sit for at least 20 minutes before you start spraying it. This is called an induction period, and do not ever let the metal temp, I like to see at least 65, nothing below 60 for sure. The warmer the better. So we generally use it between 65 and 70 degrees metal temp. You cannot let this get cold, especially being a slow epoxy. Like I said, once you mix it and spray it, don't shut the heat off in the shop and let it get down to 40 degrees at night. This product needs to stay warm for at least 48 hours, 65 degree panel temp, at least 48 hours. After that, if you need to get it outside or move it or whatever and it's gonna get a little cold, it will be okay. 2 to 3 hours pot life at 75 degrees, typically HVLP 1.4 to 1.8, 20 to 30 PSI at the regulator. So today I'm using a SADA 100B with a 1.7. So if you are using this product over bare metal, apply 2 medium wet coats. I do reduce it when we are using it over bare metal. We are trying to make it a little bit thinner. This product, being so slow, is very good about not bridging over scratches, but we want 80 grit scratches, and we do want it a little thinner when we're using it over bare metal. So I do recommend reducing 10% if using it as a epoxy sealer over bare metal. As a high build primer surfacer, which is what we're going to do today on the Lincoln, apply 2 to 4 medium wet coats, 4 to 1 mix, no reduction. So no reducer is required for this primer. And again, this is a very slow primer. We're going to give it 30 minutes, maybe 40 sometimes, 30 to 40 minute flash times. Your dry film build per coat, depending on gun application, all of that, can be anywhere from 4 to 6 mils dried. So when we talk about recoat with L-411, L-411 must be sanded before a top coat is applied. Minimum time allowed before recoat is 48 hours, and sanding and scuffing is required. So if I'm using this over bare metal and I'm going to put filler over this, I need to give this 2 days, 48 hours before I start sanding this and covering it with filler. If I'm going to prime a part and I'm going to go to paint, I am going to prime it, I'm going to give it 2 days, prep the part, paint the part. You could use this as a sealer technically, but it is not what it's intended for. It is intended to be a epoxy primer and a high build surfacer. All right, so we're getting ready to mix this product. So if I look at my TDS, I'm gonna mix a half a gallon at a time. So 64 fluid ounces, we need 2,624.1 grams of 411.
So now I'm at 26, 24.1. I'm gonna zero my scale again. L-411 is going to be 441.5 grams. So now I just mix it as I would any other product, mix it thoroughly. I'm gonna let it sit for 20 minutes. And during that 20 minutes, I can stir it up a little bit here and there, maybe every 5 minutes or so, just kind of give it a little stir or a little shake and let it sit at least 20 minutes before we spray this.
So let's talk a little bit about surface prep. This car, what we did, we epoxied the metal, we did our filler work over epoxy. This has been blocked out to about 180. So we've used some 240 here and there, but mainly I would say this is at about 180. So right now we're getting ready. We're gonna do 3 coats of L-411 out of a 1.7 SATA 100B. And when we spray this primer, we don't want to pound it on. It will run. You need to apply it the same, every coat the same as the last. Don't put a heavy first coat on and a medium second and a heavy third. Consistency. Put it all on the same way. If you want more build, just put more coats on. You're not going to get the same result as you will if you put 2 heavy coats on as if you put 4 medium wet coats on. So I'm spraying at about 28 PSI or so. I'm gonna check my spray pattern. We're good to go.
So right now we've got 1 coat of L-411 on, and you can see in certain areas where the edges of the filler are and things, it's kind of getting that little bullseye look. That's typical on 1 coat of primer. The filler is porous, the metal is not, and things aren't quite laying out exactly the same, and that's totally normal, especially with a high build primer like this when that filler is going to be absorbing solvent. But another thing I want to definitely touch on is metal temp. Right now, my metal temp is 75 degrees, which is actually quite warm. The warmer the better, in my opinion. So, nothing below 65 ever. If you guys are spraying this primer, don't let it get below 65 for at least 48 hours after you've put it on the car.
So we're gonna do 4 coats of L-411 on this car. I'm gonna give it, right now I've got about 15 minutes before I do my 3rd coat. After my 3rd coat, I may even give it 45 minutes splash time before I put my 4th coat on. This is a very slow primer, and it is made for this exact thing, mostly restoration. We are not running a sprint here, we're running a marathon. This primer is typically done shrinking within 24 to 48 hours. 0 shrinkage after that. All the solvent is gone. If you watched any of the shrink test videos, you can refer to that as far as the amount of time it takes to shrink and the dry film build. If you haven't watched that, I would take a look. Pretty interesting stuff. So there we have it. We've got 4 coats, L-411 down, laid out great. It is a little bit peely, as really any high build primer is, just because it is a high build primer. Generally don't lay out amazing, but this isn't too bad. I would compare it about to 2050 or CRE. This primer is very similar to those, really in all aspects. It is a high build epoxy, and the main differences is this builds a little bit more, it shrinks less, and it does sand better. This doesn't really have a skin like 2050 has kind of a skin on it when you cut it open if you've ever used it. CRE is a little bit of the same way, not as bad, but this powders very nicely once it's actually dried and ready to sand. After 48 hours, this powders really nicely.
So let's go over the sandability of this primer. So generally, like the Lincoln, for example, at the next step is going to be, we're going to block that with 150, finish it with 180 again, prime it again, and then after that next prime, we're going to go 240, 320, 500, and then to paint. So let's talk about the sandability. So step one, after I have body worked a car, this is at the same stage as the Lincoln right now. So this has been body worked and primed with L-411. So let's just sand this a little bit with 150. As you can see, it sands very nice. It's not plugging the paper. Doesn't plug the paper. So let's go to 240. If you've ever used CRE or VP 2050, you know that those primers have a bit of a skin on them where it kind of plugs the paper a little bit at first. This does not do that. So this is 240 right here on unsanded L-411. Same thing. Doesn't plug the paper. We can even go as high as 500 here, which is what our finishing grits would be. And I can block this with 500 and it won't plug this 500 even.